Old man Dade and his wife Minnie had spent their entire lives living just outside the isolated town of Oliver Springs, Tennessee. All they had in this world was a log cabin that Dade had built himself, a cornfield planted on a steep mountainside, a bridled cow, a hen, and a rangy razorback sow. But somehow, with all the corn they raised, the milk and the butter from the cow, the eggs from the hen, and now and then a litter of pigs from the sow, they managed to get along. Then one year, they had a run of bad luck. A cloudburst sent such a torrent of water rushing down Windrock Mountain that it carried Dade's cornfield clean away. A fox stole the hen, and the bridled cow slipped and fell over the edge of a cliff, and that left only the razorback sow to ward off starvation. Well, I reckon I'll have to sell her and buy some food, Dade figured. We ain't got nary a dust of meal to make any cornbread, no milk, butter, or eggs. I don't know how we're going to live. It made Minnie sad to think of parting with the sow, but there was nothing to do but give her consent. So one morning, just at sunup, Dade set off down the mountain with the sow following along on the end of a rope. He aimed to lead her down to town, which was nearly a day's trip away, where he could get the best price for her. Not far from home, he came to a shallow creek bubbling along the stones, and he sat down and took off his shoes and began wading in it. It was the quickest and easiest way to get down from Windrock Mountain, and as he was splattering along with the sow at his heels, he was feeling very downcast when he noticed a jug bobbing along in the stream. At first, he thought he would pick it out of the water and take it along with him. If it was a good jug, it might come in handy sometime or another. But then he said to himself, well, it's only something worthless, or it wouldn't have been thrown in the water anyway. I shouldn't worry about it. And he waded on past it down the stream. Then, to his surprise, he heard a voice. Hey, you. It was a spiteful, twanging and shut-up voice. Dade stopped for a moment. It might have only been the shrilling of a cricket. Hey, you. Come back down here and let me out of here. The words seemed to be coming from the floating jug. And if you know what's good for you, you'll let me out in a hurry. Dade stood bumfuzzled while the jug floated nearer. And then he reached down and he lifted it from the water. It was a good, solid, earthenware jug, all in one piece and tightly stoppered. Come on now, don't waste time. Pull out that stopper, commanded the voice. And it did indeed come from inside the jug. Dade was flabbergasted. He stood holding the jug, hardly believing his own ears. Well, don't just stand there like a goof. The voice came springing out sharply. Open that cork now and let me out. Now, Dade was a canny mountain man. He hadn't been born just yesterday, and a voice corked up in a jug was a mighty curious thing. Who knows what might come pouring out if he pulled out that cork? He stood figuring on it and studying what to do. I can see you're a good, kind-hearted man. The voice suddenly took on a new tone. You know, it's mighty cramped quarters in here, and I'm suffering something terrible. I've got a crick in my neck, and both my feet have gone to sleep. If you'll only take the trouble to pull out that cork, it would be a deed of kindness. Well, who might you be in there? Stammered Dale. Well, if you want to know the truth, I'll admit it, I'm the old boogerman. That's who I am. Now let me out of here. I've got a deal of business that's been neglected. Dave was startled and he almost dropped the jug. The old devil himself. Excuse me, sir. He recovered enough to ask, but what might you be doing, shut up in a jug? Well, wouldn't you know, it was a woman that got me into it. Well, it must have been a powerful strong woman to cram the devil into a jug. No, it wasn't, the voice replied. It was a little bitty body, just as frail as a dandelion. You'd never think that she had it in her to do such a trick. But here I am, corked up like a blackberry and not able to stir hand nor foot. Well, if you're the boogeyman, you ought to be able to just push that cork out yourself. Can't you do some witchcraft or magic or something like that? Well, haven't you seen what's on the cork? Snapped the voice. Dade looked down and he examined the cork. A cross was painted on the top of it. There, you see? That's one sign the devil can't pass. Oh, and that little gal, she knew what she was about. She was a smart one, I tell you. Well, how did she manage to get you in there? Dade was full of curiosity. Well, let me out first and I'll tell you all about it. Oh, no, replied Dale craftily. Tell me first and then I'll consider on what I'll do. Well, seeing how you got me at a disadvantage, I might as well tell you, buzzed the old boogerman inside of the jug. You'll see, all right, how badly I was mistreated. Well, as you know, I pass through these mountains every now and again, but you wouldn't recognize me for the devil if you met me on the road. I can take almost any shape, and mostly I walk around looking like any other man, only a mite bit handsomer and a sight more friendly. It's easy to make more trouble when you're handsome and have a smooth tongue. But tell me about this jug here. Dade reminded him. Weren't you going to tell me how this woman put you in that jug? I'm a-comin' to it, the voice replied impatiently. You see, there's an old granny woman up the mountain a piece, and she's somewhat of a witch. And sometimes she calls on me to help turn somebody's cow sick or throw a misery on someone that she's got a spite against. Well, one day, I was stirring up a brew for her, when out of the house floated this pretty little gal. Oh, she was golden-haired, light as a dandelion, in a mountain breeze. You never would have believed such a pretty thing like that could have belonged to such an old hag. But sure enough, she was the old woman's daughter. I put on my most handsome looks and my best smile, and I made up to the little gal like anything. I tell you, I courted her day in and day out, and she finally agreed to marry me. The old granny woman, she wasn't pleased at the idea of her daughter marrying the devil, but I figured she'd be afraid to say anything. Anyway, one day the gal and I went a horseback riding down to Judge Canton's house at the county seat, and we got spliced. Oh, I was a happy bridegroom, I can tell you that. And the gal looked happy too, and that just shows how deceitful she was. As soon as we got to the cabin, she led me back to a back room and closed the door. She locked it, and she put the key in her pocket. I took one look around that room, and I let out a yell. I knew I'd been betrayed, and I knew I had to get out of that room right away, or I'd wither up like an old dried leaf. Well, whatever was the matter? Asked Dale. Oh, there were signs of crosses everywhere I looked. Even knives and forks were crossed on the table. I turned to the gal. Was she the one who had tricked me, or was it that old hag of her mother? There she stood, just laughing in my face. Oh, you thought you had me fooled, she said. You thought I didn't know who you were, Mr. Devil, but I knew all along, and now I've got you. I bet you won't go around fooling any women anymore. And I tell you, that made me mad. I turned myself into a flash of lightning, and I meant to blast that girl into a cinder. But I looked, and she had streaked the sign of a cross on her forehead with some soot from the chimney. I couldn't touch her, and I felt myself wilting. I had to get out of there, up the chimney, of course. But there in front of it was a cross marked on the hearth, and another at the back of the chimney. I couldn't escape that way, and the windows were marked too. I looked around for any chink or cranny, but there wasn't one. And that's when I laid my eyes on the keyhole, and I laughed aloud. It wasn't marked. They had forgotten about it. Or so I thought. So I turned myself into a puff of smoke, and I began to stream through it. But I hadn't given enough credit to that old granny witch. She was outside the door, holding here this jug over the keyhole. And before I knew what happened, I found myself inside of it. The old hag popped the cork in, and there I was. Well, my. Dade shook his head. You never can tell what a woman will think up. Well, you sure can't, the boogeyman agreed. The two of them, the mother and daughter, were laughing and fit to kill. They took the jug to the side of the mountain, and they buried it in the ground. In the ground? Exclaimed Dade in surprise. Well, just how did you happen to be in that creek? It was that cloudburst a few days ago. All that water pouring down the slopes unearthed the jug and washed it into the creek. Now you see what a mean trick those women played on me. Now come on now. Us men have to stay together. Be a good fella and let me out. Dade turned the jug around and around in his hands, and it occurred to him that a talking jug might just be a very profitable possession. Well, I'll think it over, he said evasively. Well, what's there to think over? Dade didn't answer. He put the jug under his arm, gave the sow's rope a twitch, and off he went, sloshing along the creek. Inside the jug, the voice buzzed and whanged and zinged like a hive of angry bees. But Dade just ignored it. He'd got a fine idea, and he meant to carry it out. When I get down to town, I'm going to get me some empty crates, and I'm going to build a little booth, like they got at those sideshows at the county fair, he said to himself. And I'll charge money to people to come in and hear this here talking jug. When he reached town, It didn't take Dade very long to carry out his plans. In no time, he had set up a little booth with a jug inside, and Oliver Springs was crowded. Men stood around, trading horses and selling sheep or cattle, and the women had set out jams and jellies that they hoped to sell, or they hung up patchwork quilts and hooked rugs. Vendors walked around with split-bottomed chairs that they had made from stout hickory limbs, and baskets woven from rushes. Others peddled pillows stuffed with goose feathers, and good strong pottery ware. Oh, there was a passel of people on hand. At first, no one paid any attention when Dade began to shout that he had a talking jug. Then a few people strolled over, paid a quarter to buy a ticket, and walked in the booth. When they come out of the booth, though, their eyes were bugged out like marbles. The old boogerman had put on a performance for sure. Oh, and man, was he mad. He had yelled and threatened in that twanging shut-up voice of his. He bawled and bellowed and shrieked out all the bad words he could think of. Everybody who heard him came out petrified with astonishment, and it didn't take long for word to spread around. In no time, such a cloud was clamoring to get into Dade's booth that he couldn't take the money fast enough. The upshot of it was that when he arrived home that night with a tow sack full of coins and bills, and the sow still following him on the end of the rope, when Millie saw her husband toting all that money, she was terror-struck. She thought he had lost his senses and robbed a bank. But no, Dade assured her that he had made all that money in an honest way, and he explained to her just what had happened. After that, there was nary a soul from one end of Morgan County to the other that was as joyful as Minnie. Dade was full of plans for making money with the devil in the jug. Next day, he set off for the county fair, where he set up a booth on the midway. After that, there was court week at the county seat. People that had fallen afoul of the law were glad to take their minds off the troubles by sneaking a look at the now famous talking jug. Oh, and there was always an affair of one sort or another down in the valley, and Dade was sure to be there with his booth and his talking jug. Up at the cabin on Windrock Mountain, he and Minnie had more money than they knew what to do with. They had bought several cows and cleared some new land for a cornfield and bought a mule for plowing it. Inside the cabin, there was new furniture, some fine dresses for Millie, and some good suits for Dale. Oh, things were going just fine for them. Then one day, Dade went off to buy a piece of land that he had his heart set on, and he left the jug sitting on the mantelpiece with a word of caution to Minnie. She was to make sure that nothing jostled it or caused it to fall, and she was to watch out that nothing happened to it. "I'll take my best care of it. Don't worry, honey," Minnie promised. Then she sat down and began to churn the rich cream from the fine milk cow that they had just bought. Her husband hadn't been gone long when she heard an evil laugh coming from within the jug. "Well, what are you laughing at?" Millie asked uneasy, and I tell you, she didn't feel quite right about having the old boogerman in the house. "I'm laughing at that husband of yours. What a dunderhead he is, if I ever saw one." "Well, what's he done to make you call him a dunderhead?" Of course, Minnie knew well enough that Dade was a dunderhead, in spite of the fact that he had been making so much money lately. Hadn't he been the one that planted the cornfield where the water could wash it away? And hadn't he let the cow fall off the cliff? But she didn't think about the time when she herself had left the hen house unlocked for the fox to steal the hen. "I've offered him a chance to make some big money," buzzed the voice, "and I'm laughing to think what an idiot he is not to take it. Why, you could be sitting in a big white house just like Judge Canton's down at the county seat and riding around in a fine automobile if your husband only had some sense. But no, but he must go trampling around from one poor little gathering to the next, making a few measly pennies." Minnie was taken aback. The money brought home by her husband seemed nothing short of a fortune to her. "But how could he do better?" she stammered. "Don't you know that all the money in the world is at my command? And I only have to say a word, and you could see your table piled with greenbacks as high as the ceiling." It was true, of course. The devil had worldly power, and Minnie didn't doubt that for a moment. And suddenly, it came to her that maybe she could manage better than her husband had. "What could we do to be so rich?" she inquired. "Well, only a small thing. I want you to take the stopper out of this jug. Pull it out, and I promise I'll leave your table piled with so much money you'll never be able to spend it all." Well, shucks, that's easy to promise. But how do I know that you wouldn't just fly off and forget about all of your promises? No, I'd have to see that money before I opened the jug. Instantly, the table gave a loud creak, and it was suddenly full with packages of money that reached clean up to the rafters. She could hardly catch her breath for looking at the huge mound of bills. It's all yours if you just pull out this cork. And if you don't let me go, I'll take it away, and you'll never get this chance again. There it was in plain sight. Millie put her hand on it. Oh yeah, it was real. There was no shamming or monkey business about it. She stumbled to the mantel and took down the jug and pulled out the cork. Instantly, there was a terrific flash of lightning. The logs of the cabin flew apart like straws, and the money on the table burst into flames. It burned up in a moment, and the thunderclap that followed frightened all the livestock, so that the cows and the mule ran off mooing and fell over the cliff. The devil's laughter went rolling across the sky. And that night, when Dade came home, he found Minnie laying stunned among the ruins. He fetched some water from the spring and he brought it to her, and she gasped out the story of what had happened. So they got up and they began to look over their possessions. There was nothing left except their old friend, the razorback sow. Well, I reckon I'll have to sell her, Dade said, and there was nothing for Minnie to do but give her consent. So off went Dade, just as sad as he could be, with his sow at the end of a rope. Down the stream he went, thinking about how useless it would be to make any more bargains with the devil.